Hello, and welcome to the Lemon Grove podcast. In this edition, I'm joined by Jesse and Julie Bertoni from the state of Arizona and Santa Fe, where Jesse is living. And Jesse is a friend of mine from many years, where we met in Italy, where we were studying at the University of Gastronomic Sciences. And we were having lunch, and Jesse mentioned his time living in Phoenix, where citrus is a big issue. I mean, everybody knows about Texas, California, Florida for the citrus, but Arizona has a fantastic history of the fruits. And he met Julie at an event at the Clark Park Community Gardens. And so we thought it would be a great opportunity to chat to Julie to see what happens in the gardens, particularly reference to citrus. And they had a big event a couple of days ago. So welcome both. Maybe you'd just like to quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll start grilling Julie on her life in citrus. I know it's a small part of your life, but it's fascinating for us. So Jesse, maybe you'd like to kick off?
Yeah, sure. My name's Jesse Dart. Bruce and I, we went to the same school in Italy, the University of Gastronomic Science. And studied anthropology and anthropology of food, and became sort of fascinated with citrus ages ago.
And my name is Julie Bertoni. I am a resident of Tempe, Arizona, which is a town just adjacent to Phoenix. I have been running a citrus share at our local community garden for about 4 years now, and that's where I met Jesse. We just kind of struck up a conversation about how to make the most out of the local harvests that we have around here. So that's how we all kind of came together.
Excellent. Maybe, Julie, you could just tell us a little about the Clark Park Community Gardens and what goes on there before we sort of dive into the citrus part of it.
So Clark Park Community Garden is a fabulous little organization that started out, I believe, in 2014. There had been a public pool that was disused and just out of order, and I think there was a crack in the bottom of it. So the neighborhood had voted to put in a little community garden there instead. And it quickly became kind of like the center of life in our neighborhood. They had artisan markets and farmers markets. They had people playing the steel drums and, just food trucks and stuff. And it just became a nice place for the community to come together. So after a few years of that going on, let's see, the city voted again to put a pool back in the park. And so the city displaced the garden because they wanted to put the pool back in the exact same spot. But the nice thing was, then they built a garden for us according to our specifications. So we were able to tell the city what we needed, how much amperage we needed in our electricity, a shed, and just kind of, they built everything according to our requests, which was awesome. So now we have this really large, beautiful garden, and there are probably, I don't know, about like 18 garden plots that people can rent annually. There are also events every few weeks. Well, there's like a community-supported agriculture system that comes through, and every first and third Saturday of the month, we have bags of fresh organic produce that is just harvested from farms nearby. So people will come and pick up their produce, and that kind of has turned into a focal point for other community events. So I also run a community coffee, which is like a gathering where people just come. There's a big table, free coffee, free tea, and we have pastries and things like that. It's just meant to be a time for people to come together and just stay and interact and talk with each other. And then we have evening events and things like that too. But we also started a citrus share in 2022, I believe, was the first time we did that.
Yeah, I was getting vegetables from the CSA. And when I first moved there, I found out about it, and I was getting vegetables from there twice a week. Then I heard about the Citrus Share. I think I joined a newsletter group. I was working at the airport, actually, and walking through my neighborhood, and I just remember smelling all of the like citrus blossoms and like how aromatic it was, in that period of the year. And then my friend Dan, whose family has lived on the north side in Peoria for a long time, they have tons of citrus trees in their yard too. And like his family was always giving us citrus and stuff like that. He was one of my roommates. And it just kind of like all connected then. I was like, wow, there's just like an insane amount of front and backyard citrus trees, and like most of them, at least in the Tempe area, are quite old. The trees are well established. They make an overabundance of fruit.
I was reading about Arizona, and there's the 5 C's, which is cotton, copper, cattle, climate, and citrus. So I think it did have a big commercial operation back in the 20s and 30s and 40s maybe. But I guess it's got a bit hotter there, and the waters are in short supply. The citrus needs a lot of water. So I guess most of the production is now reduced. And so, as Jesse was saying, it's in people's back gardens that sales and sharing and honesty boxes are seen.
Yeah, like nobody has apple trees, right? There's no apple trees in backyards. It's just too hot for apples and pears.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up in Michigan in the American Midwest, and same kind of thought. I moved here in 2013, and I was really struck, just like Jesse was, by how abundant the citrus fruits are here. Because one tree will have maybe 1,000 grapefruits on it.
Wow.
It's really staggering, and people who own these trees are always guilty about how they can't eat all the fruit and it falls and they can't keep up with it. And so it really strikes you when you're walking through the neighborhoods, because you can see them. They look like these big jewels, like Christmas ornaments on these big, lush, round trees. The shape of a citrus tree is really is just kind of round and bulbous, and it has such a, I don't know, it's just a really magical quality to it. And they're these bright, colored fruits hanging on them. And so it's striking when you walk through the neighborhoods and see this. So I started to ask people about the different trees that were around. So there's, we have grapefruit, there's ruby red grapefruit, but there's also white grapefruit, which is a little bit mellow and mild. There's also pink grapefruit, which I usually use pink grapefruit to seduce people who think that they aren't grapefruit fans, because you get grapefruit in other parts of the country, and it's ruby red, and it's been on the shelf for maybe a couple weeks, and it doesn't have that gorgeous fresh taste anymore. And so I say, oh, okay, you don't like grapefruit? Sure. And we slice open a pink grapefruit for them and let them taste it. And it has converted so many people. So that's abundant here in Tempe. And there are kumquats. We have tangerines. There's a type of citrus called Arizona Sweets that people are very proud of. Not every fruit tree or anything else. And the same is true of oranges. So there are people who have really pretty decorative oranges on their front lawn, and they kind of laugh when someone thinks they're being, scheming and taking a piece of fruit off of it while they're walking by, and then they take a bite and realize it's awful and they throw it away.
Okay. I think those are Seville oranges.
Yeah, they might be, and they might also just be God knows what. I mean, honestly, I think some of these trees are just from varietals that aren't, necessarily celebrated in commercial usage, but they're possibly a whole variety that aren't really used for eating. So we also have, so Arizona Sweets are a big thing. I see a lot of tangelos around here. So those look like regular standard kind of darker, richer orange rinds, and they have this little nubbin on where the stem was. So it has this extra little hump, and those are usually very juicy.
Tastes quite sweet, like tangerine or a little bit.
Yeah, they're larger, so that you get more fruit out of it, but they're really sweet. They're very, very nice. Yeah. And one thing I'll say too is, so Tempe had been a farming community when it was first settled. A lot of the streets closer to downtown here have like pecan trees and mulberries. There's like tons of mulberries in my neighborhood, things that I wouldn't really expect to see just walking around in a desert. But it was irrigated very early on, and the place was settled to kind of support trees and support groves. And that's historically been why it's easier, I think, to have a lot of fruit trees here.
Yeah, the house that I was in, was built in 1950, and that neighborhood in Tempe just had tons of old growth trees, huge pine trees, and like trees that probably should struggle a bit in the desert. But the flood irrigation that comes through these irrigation channels, you pay the city a certain amount of money each year. The guy comes around on a certain day every 2 weeks, opens a valve up, and it floods your front and backyard. So I never had to water my yard, never had to water, give the citrus trees any water. They were always getting water straight out of the canal, which was untreated, so it didn't have any chemicals or anything in it either. I had lemon and 2 orange trees and some type of little mandarins, which were incredibly sugary and very seedy, like tons of seeds in those. And then just like an ancient grapefruit tree that was almost hollow in the middle. It was so old, but it would make hundreds of grapefruits a year. And the best thing for me in the morning, in the wintertime, when, the oranges and stuff were getting ripe, is in the morning, I would walk out and just pick a handful of citrus, like a couple of lemons, an orange, maybe one grapefruit if they were ready, and juice those for breakfast. And it was cold already because it was chilly outside. And just sort of some random mix of citrus juice, And I never bought fruit all winter, not one time.
Fantastic, yeah. And does that flooding of the yards, how does that work? Does it still happen, Julie? Or happens at every couple of weeks? Is that right?
Yeah, I actually don't know the schedule. My neighborhood is just outside of the boundary for the flood irrigation options, but if you're not on the schedule, you don't know, because you'll be kind of walking along and realize that all of the yards around you are flooded, but it is a lot more efficient for water usage. So it saves a lot more water. The climate's very arid. So when you use a sprinkler system or you just sort of spray water into the air, enough of that gets pulled into the atmosphere, and it's just percentage-wise too wasteful. Putting it right into the lower part there, the ground, helps keep the roots as hydrated as possible without losing a lot of the volume to just the arid quality of the air around here.
If I remember right, even Clark Park gets flooded. Like a couple of public parks in Tempe get flood irrigation too.
Yeah, which is why it would be useful if there was a way for us all to kind of know when things are going to get flooded, because you would, take your kid to the park and everyone's excited, and then you get there and it's just a mud pile and you can't go anywhere. So, but it'll be like a vast field of the park is just completely flooded today. So you can't go to the park. You have to call around and find out which other parks might be dry.
So are there little boundaries that keep the water in, or does it just soak in pretty quickly?
Well, all the sidewalks are slightly elevated, and most people's yards in these areas have a bit of a grade to them right before you get to the edge. And people will build little hills in their yards to keep the water from seeping into their own front walks and things like that. But at the park, the field itself is usually depressed a little bit down on the ground.
So the citrus exchange, Julie, maybe you could just talk us through that at the Clark Park Community Gardens. I think they've happened quite recently. And that's where you met Jessie last year. How does that work?
It is, so basically I decided that we needed to have some central place for people to drop off their fruit and a central place where people could pick up some fruit.
So Jessie, tell us a bit more about the trees in your garden then. When you were living in Phoenix, was there a lot of maintenance to that? And how did you work your way through all the citrus that was growing there? You said hundreds of grapefruits at a time.
Yeah, I didn't do any maintenance. The gardener would sometimes prune a dead limb for me or something like that. The lemon tree had quite big thorns on it, so it was a bit treacherous to get those out. Yeah, so grapefruits would ripen last, February, March. Oranges and the mandarins would be first, and then the lemons. So I would start with whatever was ripe and move towards whatever was getting ripe. I didn't really do any maintenance. A lot of people would buy fertilizer and things like that for their fruit trees and stuff. I once was home on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and a man drove past and came up to the door, and he rang the doorbell and he said, "I'm just curious, are you still eating the fruit from the trees in the yard?" And I said, "Yeah, they make tons of fruit and stuff." And he said, "Well, my grandpa was the first guy to live in this house, and he planted all the trees in your yard." And that was in 1951. And so, I sort of dated all the citrus, which sort of made sense. I think I mentioned to you, Bruce, that the lemon tree in the front would sort of cycle through. One year it would make a lot of fruit. The next year it might make one or two lemons. You'd think it's dying. And then the year after that, it would sort of make fruit again. And it would kind of go into these cycles. But if the tree was planted in the 50s, we're looking at, it's quite an old tree. The fruit that it did make was superb. And I one year had this idea to do sort of like a selection. When the blossoms came out on the orange trees, I thought, okay, I'm going to take half the blossoms off of one orange tree, if I can manage to even do that. And so that the tree makes sort of half the amount of fruit, so that it doesn't have to struggle to produce tons and tons and tons of oranges.
I see, yes.
This would be sort of like that. It's not dry farming, but it's sort of, I can't remember what the term is for doing that sort of thing. But I've heard the sort of melon growers in Italy sometimes and things like that, when the blossoms come, they'll sort of reduce that. And I don't know if it made any difference or not, to be honest, in the taste.
Julie, so the citrus exchange, maybe you could talk us through how that was, and maybe give us some of the kind of the feelings of how people react when they come along to the Clark Park.
Okay. So yeah, a few years ago, decided to have our first citrus share, and it was actually started by my daughter, who was, I think, 6 at the time, and me and my husband. So we made a little sign and made it, kind of expanded it and laminated it so it looks like a children's drawing of fruit with feet. And so we called ourselves Neighborhood Harvest, and I just advertised as much as I could on Facebook and just the local channel, let people know that there was going to be a citrus share, for 2 groups of people who have way too much fruit to eat, please strip it and bring it. And the other half of us who don't have fruit trees, who really would like to partake of the abundance. So just kind of let everybody know, no matter what group you're in, come on over. You don't have to bring fruit to take fruit home with you. And it's okay to just stop by and see what it's all about. And so we ended up, that first citrus share, I think I would say we moved probably about 700 pounds of fruit. It was incredible. We were open for about 2 hours or so, and it was during our regular CSA drop-off time. So there was a little foot traffic. People were already, planning on coming home with some produce, and if they hadn't heard about the citrus share, they would, kind of swing by with their bag of groceries and add some grapefruit or lemons or oranges to what they were bringing home with them. There are some people in the neighborhood who either couldn't pick the fruit themselves because of time or physical ability, or they even knew a neighbor who was quite elderly and had this big, beautiful tree and wanted to contribute fruit. So I offered to go around picking fruit for people too. So I got to meet some neighbors that I never would have encountered before. People would leave their side gates open, be like, I'm at work right now, but go ahead in. There are some pickers and I left some bags out for you. Thank you so much, just because they wanted to be able to contribute and be part of it. That year, my car smelled like a grapefruit for about 3 weeks, but it was a lot of fun, and it was really well worth the effort. People arrived over that 2.5 hours. Sometimes we would get low on fruit and think, oh, I guess that's it. And then, 10 minutes later, somebody would arrive with a bushel of oranges. And then, we've got more in the car, and they'd come back with all their grapefruit. The first one was a great success, and I realized we needed to do it with some regularity. So I think we held 3, maybe 4 that season, just so that everyone could get everything off their trees. The nice thing about the citrus trees is that they're kind of like a refrigerator for your food. You can pick your first grapefruit, around Christmas time, or maybe a little earlier or later, depending on the year and depending on your tree. And I would keep on picking grapefruit until April on some trees, just because they will stay and they will wait for you to want them. Same with lemons. Oranges usually go quicker and earlier. So we've been kind of light on oranges in our citrus shares because we usually do it in January and onward. And a lot of orange trees are kind of picked over by then. So we started in 2022. And then the following year, people were already starting to ask about when we're going to have our first one. And so it was anticipated and people were happy it came back. And so we just have made it a regular thing. Yeah.
And do you have like cooking lessons or anything to sort of give people ideas? When I was researching, I found an Arizona sunshine lemon cake. And I think Jesse sent me a recipe for shaker lemon cake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lemon pie, shaker lemon pie.
Yeah. So as part of the CSA bag pickup, the people who are in charge of that, I'm involved with the garden, but I don't do the CSA as much as some of my fellows do. But they will often come up with recipes that are related to the food that's going to be in the bag. And if they know that there's a citrus share coming up, they'll locate some recipes and put them in there. But what's been really nice is people will offer ideas about what they do with their fruit. A lot of people will overhear, someone else is saying, well, what do you do with all this? And then someone will cut in and say, well, you can freeze, you can put them in ice cubes and freeze them so you can just have fresh lemon or fresh, orange all year long. I've shared little ideas like cutting an orange in half and putting it with some brown sugar and butter, and then you broil it, and then you just eat it with a spoon. That's absolutely fantastic. People make a lot of things with their lemons here too. They make limoncello. There's grapefruit cello. People make lemon curd. I made like a lemon, and it was like a grapefruit bacon creme anglaise. It sounds unorthodox. It is unorthodox, but it was fantastic, and it was one of my high points of culinary feats in my life.
What was the title again?
It was a creme anglaise that I put grapefruit and bacon grease in.
Okay.
And it was amazing.
Bacon grease, I heard, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it went really well together. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's
Yeah.
something we could try, Jesse. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But as far as the interactions between people, and I think this was the thing that made me really fall in love with this this community event, is that people became friends over fruit. Someone would bring their tangelos and watch people eagerly take them, and they would say, "Oh, this is my tree. My uncle planted this tree," and they would just start telling stories about the fruit itself, what they do with it. They would realize that they live a block apart from each other and, had friends in common. And so it just became a place for people to just come together and realize that, they're neighbors, and some great conversations would get started up. Jesse and I met and talked at great length about Italy and olives. and it's just a nice place for people to slow down and connect with each other.
Yeah, I mentioned to Bruce that one of the other big fruits in the neighborhood is olives. And I think that at one point you had an idea to get a grant to get an olive mill so that people could mill some olives for oil and things like that. Because I know walking my dog around the neighborhood, sometimes when the olives would all be on the sidewalk, you walking on the pits and on the stones, it's not very nice. But I wanted to say, just about the whole citrus thing, sharing something like citrus, which I think for a lot of people, especially in colder climates, feels like such a luxury in the wintertime, right? Like your lemons and oranges and grapefruits are not necessarily the cheapest fruits and stuff like that. And here it is, you can just show up and take what you need or take what you want. And there's just sort of this overabundance. And I haven't, even living in Italy and things like that, I haven't really come across that type of situation before where there's just an overabundance of a vegetable or a fruit. Maybe the only other thing that I can think of coming from the Midwest, I grew up in Illinois, is zucchini in the summer. Sometimes people have a crazy amount of zucchini and they just want to get rid of it, and there'll be boxes of zucchini out on the sidewalk. I think one of the things that was in my head was I wonder if local chefs are interested in this or something like that, getting something sort of hyper local fruit, right? It's not traveling very far.
And one thing that I think is really great about this type of event, it's just, it's organic, it's grassroots, it's just people coming together, and the purpose is very simple. There's not much of an agenda, and it's kind of a free flow for 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on how busy the day is. Those types of connections that people can make are just, you're kind of invited to share an idea. Oh, what if there's, a chef who might want to do this? And then someone nearby might say, actually, I'm starting a catering business. I've watched people basically get jobs from being around their neighbors for long enough and overhearing a conversation, getting another cup of coffee together and just making community connections stronger. And I think it's nice that the citrus is just so abundant that it kind of creates a milieu for us to kind of come together and spend time, and people learn about the history of the neighborhood. People learn about their own neighbors. They exchange tips. People will make arrangements to come to their neighbor's yard and help them graft a tree so they can, get a little bit more life out of their lime that's dying or something like that. One thing that I learned about our neighborhood, which was pretty cool, and I wish I had an example to show you guys, but there's something called a citron, and it's this large, gnarly, ugly lemon it can be the size of a human head. So, I've had a citron that was as big as my own head. And there's it is just a bumpy, thick rind with about an inch of pith. And then you get to the fruit on the inside, and the fruit is usually a little bit mellower than a lemon. And it's usually not seen around the country. It's not something that we see in the United States very much. I think it originated around the Mediterranean. It's one of those storied fruits, but somehow it has it took root here. So there's 6 or 7 citron trees dotted around the neighborhood, and they make this, bizarre fruit that people want to pick up and talk about. It's a conversation starter for people, and it's a delightfully refreshing fruit.
And what do people do with it? Do they candy the peel, or just go for the flesh because it's a little bit sweeter than the lemon?
It's funny that I'm thinking about, your questions about are there ways to use the fruit and special, recipes that people use? But the thing is, when you're flooded with the fruit, you're just trying keep up with it. So a lot of us, I think, get fruit and we just eat it. We get fruit, we stick it in our drink. Citrons they're not the bigger trees here. So they might have like 8, 9 fruits at a time. So they might have some that are kind of on deck and they're going to be harvested later. But usually you don't get more than a few citrons at a time out of those trees. And they're also just so big and heavy. It feels very greedy to take an armful of them. Usually people, I think, will just slice them and put them in their drink or, squeeze them over fish or something like that. It's not much of a recipe kind of thing, but I've made gobs and gobs of marmalade. I know almost everybody I know has tried marmalade and it's really satisfying. It's a great thing to make.
Have you got any more citrus exchanges this season? Because you kind of mentioned the season goes till March. March, April.
Yeah, March or April. So we did our first one this past Saturday, and we'll continue holding them probably every 2 weeks until we strip the trees. One thing that I don't know Jesse, when did you move away from the Phoenix area?
Just last year, actually.
Okay. So one thing that we've noticed is that the harvest has gotten smaller and smaller every year for most people. And so most neighborhoods, like the average block in Tempe has fewer trees now than it did in 2022 when this all started. So around, I think it was in 2023 or 2024, we started having really, really hot summers. We would have, for your listeners in the UK, we're talking like 50 degrees without a break. So usually in the past, we would have hot summers, but then overnight it would get cool again. And so we started having summers where it was 2 months straight of over 100 Fahrenheit every day. Over 110, actually. We had a big streak of those. And that was really hard on the trees. We've also historically had monsoons, which sound so much more intense than they are, but they're really just very strong rainstorms for about 20, 30 minutes, and then the sun comes out again. That's usually what happens. But the last couple years, we haven't had heavy rains at all in the summer. So in addition to enduring this really incredible heat, the trees are just desiccated and they're weak. And I think also the blossoms start in March, usually like February, March. And then we have, a period where like there's these little tiny, tight green fruits on the trees. And then they start to get bigger and they ripen. But that summertime is really important because that's when the fruits turn from these little tiny things to these, recognizable baby fruits.
Yes.
And if the summer is too difficult for the trees, they just can't survive. So we've had, I think it was starting around like 2024, I had a number of neighbors who had to cut off limbs of their trees because they were like, this limb is clearly dead. We need to remove it and we need to do some strategic trimming to encourage growth in other parts of the trees. So a lot of people got a crash course in arborist life
really, yes, yeah.
pretty soon. And then we've seen, like Jesse said, a lot of these trees are old and a lot of them were planted around the same time when our neighborhood was built. And so a lot of them, they have a lifespan of about 65 years or so. So a lot of them just started dying around the same time. So we've had fewer trees, fewer fruits over time, but there's still a great interest. And I think the more people have learned that this is like a regular annual thing, we are pulling from trees that we haven't used before. We're meeting neighbors that haven't participated before because they know that this is here now.
I definitely lost some limbs. I lost some limbs in that heat of that summer, on the lemon tree in particular, had to cut a couple off. It didn't make it. And I think even that summer, saguaro cactus, we were also struggling and even dying, some of them. It was so hot.
Yeah, 2 summers ago, you would be driving. So in Arizona, the berms on the freeways have all of these like beautifully landscaped desert scenes. And so there are these saguaro cacti everywhere. There's ocotillo, there's agaves, there's just all of these crazy desert plants everywhere. And that summer, you would see crews removing them over and over just because they were dry, desiccated, they were golden crispy. They were falling over. We had 2 really beautiful saguaros in my neighborhood, just like on the next block over, that one of them just fell right over. Yeah. And your question, Bruce, I heard you asking about like, is this climate change? Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, I meet people who grew up in Phoenix and they'll say, overnight it would get down to the 70s. Like or like the low 70s, which is like around, 20 or, 18, something like that in Celsius.
A lovely temperature, yeah.
Yeah. And that would be the in the middle of the night in the summertime, you would always kind of cruise down to a low, and it's just not doing that anymore. There are periods where it doesn't get like above, or it doesn't get below 100 again.
Tricky.
Yeah.
Well, I hope things improve there for you. So we're kind of wrapping up now. Is there any other thing you'd like to ask, Jesse? Anything you'd like to know about?
No, I think it all sounds pretty good. I do remember seeing the chedri, like the citron.
The big citron fruits.
Yeah, the really big ones. Yeah. And I would just say, like, I never really saw anybody planting like really exotic citrus, like Buddha's hands or like something like that, It's all pretty straightforward, lemons, limes, oranges, grapefruits. But who knows? Maybe those people with those like more exotic varieties are keeping them all to themselves or something like that at their house.
No, that's great. I think what you've done, Julie, with your daughter and her husband is kind of really fantastic, and created a huge, like a whole. Well, for me, it's a fantastic interest in citrus in Arizona. I never thought about the fruit being there, and I think it's great that the food. I think one of the things we studied at university, Jesse and I, was like how food is so much part of someone's culture and bringing people together as a community. And I think that's a perfect example of what you've done there.
Yeah. And if I may, there's just something else. I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I think like it's not really just about the fruit. I mean, the fruit is great, and no one likes to waste, and it's special to have that just falling off the trees around here. But what you were just saying about how it's just great for people to come together. Food brings people together, and it was because of the Citrus Share that we met so many people. And not only that, I met one of my best friends at like just being part of the Citrus Share and getting the CSA bag. And we're super close now. And now we last year, it's about a year and a half ago now, we started doing this community coffee table where, it's just a regular meeting point for people now. We've been doing it for over a year. People just insist on giving donations because they want to help out with the cost of the coffee and the snacks and stuff. And we often get such a surplus that we just give it to local organizations. So it's become, because of this success of the Citrus Share and the knowledge that like people will come and stay and they want to be together, we were confidently going forward and starting this community coffee gathering that just keeps people regularly coming together, even when there's no fruit to share. But we say things like, if you have extra propagations from your plants, bring them. We want to have them. Somebody once brought a box full of ceramics that she made in a ceramics class. And she's like, I have too many pots around my house. Please take some of these. And now people will use them as their mugs, to drink their coffee. So it's having the abundance on the fruit trees has brought us together as a community in ways that exist independent of the fruit now, which is really special.
I think that's a fantastic story. And what a great way to finish. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very, very lucky out here. And Jesse, thank you for making this connection. It was really a pleasure to talk about it. And thank you for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure. And I have never been to Arizona. I've been to Texas and California. So I just need to make it to Arizona one day. But thank you so much, Julie, for sharing all your knowledge. A lot of citrus knowledge there for the work you're doing in Tempe and Phoenix. And thanks, Jesse.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I like connecting people like this. It feels good, and glad we could find time to chat.
Fantastic. And all the information about Arizona will be in the show notes below. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.